Executive Director and Chief Operations Officer here at CASBO. And I'm so pleased to be joined today by just our talented panel of speakers. Robert Kretzmer, the Director of Property and Liability for SISC, or the Self-Insured Schools of California. Michael Hulsizer, Chief Deputy Governmental Affairs for Kern County Superintendent of Schools. And Sarah Bachez, CASBO's own Chief Governmental Relations Officer. Thank you all for joining us on what we know to be a very complicated issue that we're going to continue to revisit over the next few weeks and months ahead. We clearly understand that our districts and schools have to protect themselves, the staff, the students, the public, and that really involves the insurance, coverage, claims, environmental aspect, risk management, legal. So a very complicated topic. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you all of the participants who continue to participate in our summer speaker series. No further ado, a couple of things here. One is that we are recording the session, and so you will receive the link. The presentation is located in the Q&A session, or excuse me, in the Q&A box, so the actual presentation is in there for you. And finally, Sarah will be moderating question and answer session towards the end. And so you can either enter your questions as you go and we'll catch up on those later, or we will allow you to raise your hand towards the end of the session to ask our experts your key questions. So with no further ado, I would like to turn it over to our panelists. Again, thank you for sharing your wisdom and insight with us today.
You want me to go ahead, Tasha?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. My name is Robert Kretzmer. I'm the director of the Self-Insured Schools of California Property and Liability Division. And can you hear me okay? Okay. If you can go to the first slide, perfect. Thank you. What I wanted to start out talking about today is a bit on coverage. As you all know, your governing body, your insurance provider, whether that be a JPA or going out into the commercial market, either has a memorandum of coverage, a liability commercial policy that's going to be applicable for your coverage. Unfortunately, many of these have some form of exclusion related to communicable disease or organic pathogens. It's going to be very important for you as a JPA to, as a school district member, to have an understanding with your JPA or insurance provider as to what the limitations are within the memorandum of coverage. I would make a second point that in the event you are with a JPA that has a relatively low self-insured retention, one of the things to be aware of is that defense costs are typically erosive of those amounts. That means if you do receive a claim or litigation, what you're going to see is those costs erode the monies available to pay a claim on behalf of your district in the event there is any coverage. My first word of caution is just to make sure you have an understanding with your JPA or insurance provider as to what the exclusions and or limitations are. I can share with you by way of background, back in 2005, 2006, with the emergence of SARS and MERS, the commercial insurance industry clarified and sharpened their exclusions relative to communicable disease and organic pathogens, including viruses. So this is not something that's new. The insurance industry saw that what was coming with those pandemics and wanted to take necessary precautions. So if you can go to the next slide. So what about liability? School districts will most likely see some claims once school returns. As we know, for employees, there's the work comp exclusive remedy, but there is the potential for school districts to be faced with potential liability exposures as a result of government claims and suits. We anticipate the claims can be presented by students, parents, volunteers, and other third parties coming onto the campuses. There are some current limited protections that we're going to find in the government code. Section 820.2 talks about discretionary immunity. There's another section 855.4, discretionary immunity relating to preventing disease. Some of these may ultimately help with the defense of some potential suits. I'm recommending, you as district council, as your district representative, want to check with your JPA and/or panel counsel or your own administrative legal counsel to get their opinion as to the effectiveness of those immunities that currently exist in the government code. But please keep in mind that's not a blanket immunity. It's just going to be something particular to the claim presented. And you can go to the next slide, please. So absent some form of limited immunity that may be provided by the state of California, as Michael Hulsizer is going to be speaking on later, what can we do to help mitigate and prevent litigation? There's not much we can do to actually prevent litigation, but we can mitigate the outcome of suits filed. And the best thing that a district can do right now is to make sure that the guidance is followed. And this is in particular with reference to the guidance by the CDC and the California Department of Public Health. All of you, I'm sure, are familiar with those documents. I would pay particular attention to the guidance offered by the California Department of Public Health. In reviewing that guidance, what we're going to find is, absent some statutory law that actually sets mandates, I think what we are going to find is that the standard of care is going to become the guidance that has been offered by the California Department of Public Health in particular. So it will be extremely important for your district to follow that guidance as closely as possible. And in addition, when you see maybe some confusion or maybe some lack of clarity with respect to guidance offered by the CDC versus the California Department of Public Health, you are going to want to turn to your local public health department and have a discussion with them to determine what the best path is. Secondly, it's going to be very important for you as a district to document those conversations, document that history of communication. So in the event you see claims filed at a later date, you can pull that file and demonstrate to your own JPA panel counsel, your own JPA, what the steps were that you took. Next slide, please. So in terms of defenses, I've mentioned the what may be some limited protection in the government code that exists currently, but something that's going to be extremely important for a school district to do. In the event a government claim does come into your office, you are going to want to immediately recognize that and send it to your JPA for review. The potential for the claim either being late or insufficient is going to be there, And that is going to require a response that is different than the standard rejection of that claim. My suspicion is we are going to see, in the event we see claims filed, we are going to see a lot of these claims probably qualify for insufficiency, which requires a very timely response on the part of the district in order to protect the district's right to fight that claim at a later date when they get in front of a court with a petition. So I strongly advise you to really work with your JPA and maybe review protocol for the filing of these claims. You're going to want to possibly consider a pre-phone call to your JPA before even the start of school, whenever you get physically back on site. Most JPAs have risk management or safety and loss departments. That would be an opportunity for you to review with your JPA the protocol that you've established and see what recommendations they have in terms of your layout, your plan for reopening schools. But most of the JPAs in the state of California are very good. There are a lot of experts out there who you can turn to for that sort of guidance as well, in conjunction with your local public health department. Turning to some of the specifics, lately we've heard districts such as Los Angeles Unified, the San Diego schools. My understanding is that San Francisco Unified, Oakland Unified, Santa Clara Unified. These are all districts that are leaning towards or have made the decision to begin the school year off-site with a distance learning model. Yesterday here in Kern County, the Bakersfield City School District, the largest K-8 district in the state of California, elected to start with a distance learning model. So in terms of plans for reopening, whether you be a large or a small district, I did take note of the recent news with the schools in Orange County, and their board has, if I understand correctly, opted to reopen school physically, but for example, not mandating mask wearing. That is an area where your JPA, I think, would have real concerns if you were to let your JPA know that your intent was to physically return to the site without a mandate or strong guidance for mask wearing. That's an area that is an obvious one that could later lead to, in my opinion, just future claims, which would be adverse to your district. So these are some of the things that need to be considered. I was taking a look at the California Department of Public Health website. So through July 13th, 2020, we have 336,508 confirmed cases in the state. 28,108 of those confirmed cases are between the age of 0 and 17. So that represents about 8% of diagnosed cases in the state. And that's our age group. That's the K through 12 age group that we are most concerned with as JPAs, as school business officials. And I also noted that 200,437 of those are between the ages of 18 to 49. That represents about 60% of confirmed cases. And I suspect that that age group, 18 to 49, that's probably right in the ballpark of your the majority of your teacher population. So with those kinds of numbers present right now, serious consideration has to be given to your plans for reopening school. And I again, just strongly recommend consultation with your JPA. One last statistics I'll share here for the opening is that in our own pool here at SISC, we're Self-Insured Schools of California is made up of about 142 school districts throughout the state. We have an ADA of around 355,000. What we saw in comparing the 2018-19 fiscal year to our 2019-20 fiscal year was we saw a 34% reduction in the number of student accident claims filed against our member districts, resulting from the closure that took place in March 2020. So this COVID-19 closure has had an impact on the volume of claims we've received in our pool. Interestingly, we only saw about a 10% reduction in actual property and liability claims. The student accident piece is just our playground accidents, our claims that really result from the physical activity on our campuses. But because of that 6-month time limit for the filing of claims under the government code, our reduction in the property and liability area wasn't quite as great. In our pool, we had one large arson suspected fire that resulted in damages of around $500,000. That took place on March 30th, just after the closure. Another reminder I wanted to share with you, your districts and as business officials, with these school sites that are closed and maybe not much activity around them, be on the lookout for ways to mitigate against vandalism, arson, obviously, damages that could take place at the school site, which is, may make them more of a target during this period of closure. So on the property side, that's going to be important, and all of your property insurance carriers will be happy to know that you're taking those precautions. So as an opening, that's what I believe I had to share, and I know that Michael is going to be reviewing the AB 1384. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I've been on an awful lot of Zoom and webcasts over the last 3 months, but this one sets the record. You've got a great market share, Casbo. A lot of people. So I'll just begin by saying, first of all, appreciate all you're doing. I spend an awful lot of time with business officials, superintendents, who are trying to manage what is undoubtedly the most extraordinary event to manage that we've had in my career. The work that you're all doing, I know that the public thinks that educators are at home collecting paychecks, but I know everybody on this call is working double time every day, 7 days a week, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. And that also extends to Tatya and Sarah and Elizabeth. They've just done a tremendous job. So it's an extraordinary time. What I'm going to try to do is focus on the legislative and advocacy efforts that are going on both here in California and in Washington. And I actually think that they complement one another. I think I'm hopeful. I know I'm hopeful. I'm really optimistic that something is going to happen. In part because there's a synergy on this issue, and this issue is even bigger than schools. But schools, frankly, are the poster child of why this is such an important issue. We serve the public. We have to serve the public. There is an expectation that we're doing everything in our power to take care of children and to be with children and to do what we do with children. And in this environment, we can't do that without risk and exposing ourselves to risk. And we've got to do that. And so if we're going to do that, people have to have our back. And that's what really this advocacy is about, is reminding lawmakers and chief executives, both in Washington and in Sacramento, that we are essential workers. We are doing the work that the public needs and demands, but we've got to, and not just because we do, but because taxpayers do, because we're doing this work on behalf of the public and we're exposing taxpayers to liability. It's not us that's being exposed, but it's taxpayers who are being exposed, and we've got to protect them. So we started talking both in the state and in the federal government almost at the onset of this virus. I know because we have Congressman McCarthy represents us, and he's the minority leader in the House. We led with this issue over 2.5 months ago with him in our first conversation with him, and said this has got to be addressed. And he, of course, agreed. And we had similar openness and receptivity here in California. And again, I want to thank CASBO for being the leader really within the statewide organizations. It's logical that business officials would think about this issue. They did. Elizabeth, Sarah, Tatya have just been on top of this issue from day one. If you can, put the letterhead up on that coalition letter in support of AB 1384. I just want to make a point that in all my years in Sacramento, I have never seen a coalition letter with more signatures than this letter in support of this bill. And that letter was coordinated by Elizabeth and CASBO. And she sent the letter out and got over 60 LEAs and statewide organizations to sign the letter. And that's important. It sent a strong message to the author and to the legislature that this issue was significant and it's real. So what does the letter speak to? Well, AB 1384, here you go. You can just see the list. Many of you probably have your organizations on this list. We thank every single one of them because you never know who reads this letter. And the fact that we had such a large group of LEAs and statewide organizations, KJAPA, the JPA authorities, because there's such a large list, that sends a message to every legislator who's going to hear this bill that this is an important issue, and they'll see their county office or their school district or an association that they recognize and respect. And so it's very important. So what does the bill do? Well, at the end, it provides us with limited and temporary liability protection. It's not blanket. We started the bill, obviously, with language like, hey, if you follow the guidance, if you pass local school district, new guidance that you're going to follow that's consistent with CDPH, you'll be protected. Well, that's not going to be enough. And I want to go back to Bob's comments. It is essential, whether we get this bill or not, that we are following the guidance, because even if this bill gets signed, if we're not, and we have a policy in place that would indicate that we're following guidance, that's not going to be protection enough. The chief consultant in the Senate Judiciary Committee, who we met with on this bill, he just led with, it's not enough that school districts adopt policies. If you get this bill, and it'll be very narrow if you do, were his almost exact words, you're going to have to demonstrate that you're following the guidance, that you're actually living and breathing and implementing whatever policies you put in place. So all of that communication that you put out, all of all the calls that you take from parents and the media and the community on this issue, in which you respond and demonstrate that your district is changing its practices and following the guidance, are all essential. That, along with this bill, is what we need. But even if we don't get this bill, following that guidance, as Bob said, and implementing it, living it, breathing it, doing it, and as I know you are, but documenting that you are, is essential. That, along with this bill, is really what's going to protect us, because the bill is not going to protect us at all if all we have is paper on a desk or in a file. We have to demonstrate that our practices are changing. The bill is as I said, in the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's not an easy committee. The chair of that committee is an attorney who believes that, generally speaking, lawsuits are the only remedy the public has to hold people like us accountable. And so their first presumption is, why would you grant immunity or protection from a lawsuit to an entity, public or private, because that removes the one remedy that the public has? Well, for all the reasons Bob gave, and I won't repeat them, we do think we have an exception, an extraordinary situation here. But that's important. But it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited if we get this bill, probably to, we're protected from an accusation that someone picked up the virus on one of our campuses. Remember, we are protected from workers' comp for our employees for the most part, but we're talking about students, parents here, and members of the public. And if we get this bill, it's going to be limited really to a protection around being accused, as long as we're following the guidance and doing it, that we're protected from people picking up the virus on one of our campuses. And so we're hopeful. Now, Washington is important, and you have a draft, or you have actually our letter that we just sent back to Washington 2 days ago, that speaks to the need for Washington to address this in the next round of fiscal relief that comes to states and local governments. I'll be honest with you, politically, the Republicans are carrying this issue. This is literally McConnell and McCarthy's #1 priority in anything, in any negotiations around a next round of relief to states and local governments. Not that they won't be supportive of additional funding, because I think they will. We've seen evidence that they will be supportive. But their issue, what they're going to get, is some kind of limited protection. Now, remember, the tort liability is for the most part a state tort liability. We're going to be sued under state law, not federal law. So, and we're aware of that. They've reminded us of that. One possibility might be that the federal government will require, in order for once an amount of money and relief is passed, they may very well think to stipulate that in order to receive this money, a state has to have some kind of statutory protection for public agencies on this liability, because in the absence of it, this money that the federal government is giving may very well go to settling lawsuits rather than providing the kind of relief to our people that we need to be providing relief to under this fiscal relief. So that's one scheme that may come from Washington, which is they'll give us money, but then tie that money to states being expected to author and enact some kind of statutory limited temporary protection for those entities at the local level that will be the recipient of these federal dollars. The politics will not be easy in Washington. Those of you who have connections with Nancy Pelosi, I'm begging right now, we need you. We need to get her attention. And, you know, that we're not trying to be callous. We're not trying to get away with something here. We have every intention, as you can see in the letter. We're very clear. We're doing this for all the right reasons. We want to serve children. We're going to be safe, but we need, taxpayers need some protection on our exposure. That's really the message. So I'm appealing to all of you that might have some connection, particularly to the speaker and to other Democrats in the California caucus, this is a time for you to step up, take this letter, rewrite this letter from the perspective of your district, your county, and follow up on this letter and help us, because I can tell you we've got Republican support on this issue, but we need Democratic support, because their position is going to be the same as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Why would I want to take away the right to sue from a parent or a citizen who needs a remedy if they aren't protected, if their child's not protected by the school, if the school doesn't do everything in its power to protect the school? So I think that's kind of the dynamic that we're looking at, both state and federal. Like I said at the beginning, I'm optimistic. We're getting good traction. I'm so thankful that Assemblymember O'Donnell, a Democrat, stepped up on this issue on behalf of schools, saw this for what it was, and his staff is great. Sophia Kim is fantastic. She's been a great staffer on this bill. She's holding our feet to the fire, making it clear that we've got to do the right thing. But I'm hopeful we'll get there. So, Sarah, Tatya, what did we miss? Anything?
So at this moment, I will open up the Q&A box to have our viewers type in their questions. We've received one that's directed towards Robert. What I did want to mention is that on the slides that Michael presented, as you see the letters that he mentioned, which CASBO has signed on, all the coalition letters on the prior slides, Michelle, are hyperlinked so that everyone can view them. At this point, I'll turn the question to Robert. It says, your slide regarding following guidance and recommendation of CDC and CDPH. We also have the local county health order that is more specific, more than 100 plus discrete action items. We need to follow and implement all, correct? What happens if there's a conflict?
Bob, you're
Panel. The recommendation from panel council has been, where you have a set of guidelines, always make the best effort to follow the most stringent. So if your local guidelines are more stringent than what is being recommended by CDC or the California Department of Public Health, the recommendation from our panel council is to follow the most stringent. And I hope that answers your question.
On this legislation, anyone can, the LEAs can submit their own letter. They are more than welcome to use the information that's in the content of each of these letters. CASBO submitted its own. We have a coalition letter, as we displayed, with various, I think, over 60 organizations signing up. If it were to get out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, what's the process? Not everyone's well versed on the legislative process, and as we know, the legislature is taking an additional week, 2 more weeks off, because they're doing a deep clean of the Capitol after a few staffers and legislators tested positive. And so do you know where the administration's at? And then walk us through the process if this bill were to get out of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Great questions. So first of all, we expect that this bill, if it gets out of the Senate Judiciary, will probably go to the Senate Education Committee, because it also has an education focus. It may not, just for the sake of time. The legislature this year is very cognizant, mindful of trying to avoid unnecessary hurdles on legislation. It's possible that this bill could go to the floor directly, but we're prepared to also have it perhaps go to Ed. And then if we can get it out of those policy committees, It may very well be flagged fiscal, would probably have to go to Senator Portantino's committee. But I am thinking that there would be great deference paid back to the Judiciary Committee on this bill. If we can get this bill out of Senate Judiciary, our chances are really very good. But we've got to get it out of that committee. So once we get it from that committee, it could go to Ed, most likely would go to Appropriations, and then it would go to the Senate floor. Then it would immediately be tracked back to the Assembly. The bill is an Assembly bill, so provided that it can't be amended at that point, it would have to be approved probably by a comparable policy committee, and then maybe the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly, and then taken to the floor. The fact that it is an Assembly bill makes it even more significant, the work that's done in the Senate. I think the Assembly is going to probably rely on the Senate's work on this bill. The Senate will be mindful of that. We'll give it added scrutiny, knowing that once it gets out of that House, it's probably going to get passed, and then it would go to the governor. We would try to, I am hopeful that the bill would be made into sort of a trailer bill, if you will, so that it would take effect immediately upon passage and being signed by the governor. We haven't really worked the governor's office yet. I feel personally that the governor and the Department of Finance, given the exposure to taxpayers on this bill, they're privately rooting for us. I know people in the Department of Finance. Sarah has a great relationship with them. Sarah, you might even want to share any conversations you've had, but I think that Department of Finance staff are probably secretly rooting for us on this bill in hopes that we'll get it to the governor, and we'd probably get a good recommendation from the Department of Finance on this bill on the natural. That doesn't mean there aren't other people in the governor's office that, would, be a little more critical and difficult, but I'm optimistic. I think on this bill, I think frankly, our first challenge may be our greatest single hurdle, which is getting this bill through the Senate Judiciary Committee. Sarah, anything? You're an expert on this process as well. What did I miss?
And I definitely miss walking the halls with you, because I think our jobs were really in person, so it's been very fascinating to flip the script and try to do everything now through Zoom like we are all doing. But yes, there's a lot of demand from other public agencies seeking and private entities seeking the same type of protection that we're asking for. But as we've seen, education has really risen to folks realizing that without schools reopening, it is making it difficult for parents to go back to work. There has been this recognition both at the state and federal level of how important brick and mortar, being back in school physically, the importance of that for our students' mental and health and safety. And so I think right now we really are in a position to keep pushing, but that requires making sure that as many LEAs as possible, as many school districts and boards speak up of the importance that this legislation would have in their ability to safely return to campus. And it takes off another hurdle that we have to overcome. And without AB 1384, without the federal protections, it does complicate the conversation. So we urge as many individual school districts to please sign up. At this point, I don't see any additional questions, but any final comments from Robert and Michael?
Bob, anything?
Yeah, one point I wanted to emphasize is that your school districts, you may want to, and you probably have already thought of this, but make sure you appoint a liaison person within your district to become familiar with the CDC, California Department of Public Health guidelines, and also connect with the local health department officials in advance so that there is a clear line of communication between your district and that agency, and possibly that person can be appointed to be the repository, for information and communications. And the second point I wanted to emphasize was once school reopens and we get back on site, you're going to want to be sure to communicate changes in protocol to your parent community in particular. If there's a significant change after you've reopened, just be mindful that those communications are going to be very important as well. And there is a social and emotional learning aspect to this that's going to be very important once reentry happens. Our good friends at Community Matters have programs in place, some trainings that's one organization that you might want to consider reaching out to, because they can help with the social and emotional aspects of returning to site and help our kids a great deal. So those are just some closing comments that I have.
Okay. I'd just like to build upon what Sarah said in terms of the importance role that you all play. This is an example. A lot of bills, it comes down to a few lobbyists, a few statewide organizations going up against, applicant attorneys in this case, or, people who want to sue. We have an opportunity in this bill to make a difference by just a critical mass of school districts and county offices of ed and associations communicating directly with legislators. I would encourage each of you. I'm looking. We've got over 350 people who are on this call. I would be willing to bet that probably 50 of the 58 counties, if not more, are represented on this call. Probably over 25% of the LEAs in California are on this call. If each of you write a letter just based upon the CASBO letter or our Coalition 1384 letter to your senator and assembly member, communicating why this issue is important to your school district or your county, that will get this bill across the finish line. I'm convinced that we can do that. Not only do we have right on our side, but we have numbers, and this is a critical issue. And I wouldn't hesitate to make the argument that our very ability to open and serve children the way they want us to serve them in brick and mortar classrooms is dependent upon this protection that's provided. Our letters say that. Don't hesitate to play that. That is a real issue. I have spoken to any number of board members and superintendents who are scared to death to open their schools after they listen to Bob. They hear Bob talk about the liability, and my gosh, it was like, well, we can't go back, and they're scared. I know you're scared, and so use that caution, out of an abundance of caution, to write that letter, communicate why you need this bill. You're not asking for blanket immunity. You're asking for temporary and limited immunity. And just make your case. And I think that you can really help us.
And to answer just the last question of what's Plan B, as you see, we're also working on the federal side, and the reason for this workshop is to make sure that every LEA is making those meetings and reviewing their every procedure that they have to take as they consider reopening. And so we think that all of these components together are critical. And as your advocate, it is our job just to continue to push for any possibility of making legislation happen. And so our urge is just to make sure that we're keeping that pressure on, both in Sacramento and DC. Yeah. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tasha to close us out. And if anyone has any additional questions, you're welcome to send us an email.
All right, thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we'll look forward to continuing our conversations around this as well as some other the complex issues that we're facing here as we attempt to reopen. Check out our learning management system. We have topics on there right now. So just letting you know that we too are going in that direction to be able to reach all of the geographic areas of our state and continue to serve you as we move forward. Thank you again, Michael and Robert, for joining us. Sarah, you as well. We really appreciate the insight and expertise, and we'll see you on the next speaker series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.